Julian Reeves was 42 years old, standing in a paint-stained work shirt at his sister's cookout, when his wife of 11 years announced to a yard full of relatives that she was leaving him. Bianca didn't lower her voice. She wanted people to hear. She called it an upgrade, trading her struggling contractor husband for a man who could finally give her the life she deserved. Friends gasped. Family members glanced at Julian with pity. Nobody in that yard knew what Julian had spent 15 years quietly building. Not the truck he drove, not the house they lived in, but what sat behind his name in paperwork nobody had ever asked to see. Julian said almost nothing. He let her have the moment completely. But standing there, absorbing every word she threw at him in front of the people who mattered most to her, Julian made a decision. And Bianca had no idea that the man she'd just humiliated in front of everyone was about to become the reason she lost everything. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The alarm never got the chance to go off. Julian Reeves was already awake at 4:47 a.m., sitting on the edge of the bed with his work boots in his hands, lacing them up in the dark. Bianca was still asleep, one arm folded under her cheek, hair wrapped neat against the pillow. He watched her for a moment, the way he still did sometimes, out of habit more than anything else, then stood up quietly and walked out. The morning was cool and smelled like wet grass. His truck, a 2009 Ford F-150 with a long scratch down the passenger door and a dent above the rear wheel well, sat in the driveway under the yellow glow of the porch light. He tossed his bag in the back and pulled out before the neighborhood woke up. The leak was at one of his units on Caldwell Street, a two-bedroom he'd owned for 9 years. The tenant, Mrs. Okafor, had called the night before, apologizing too much the way she always did. "I don't want to be a bother, Mr. Reeves." He'd told her it was no bother. He meant it. He was under the bathroom sink by 5:30 a.m., flashlight in his teeth, replacing a compression fitting that had given out. The work was simple. His hands knew what to do before his mind caught up. Replace the fitting. Check the valve. Run the water. Watch the joint for 60 seconds before trusting it. No drip. He wiped his hands on a rag, left a new box of garbage bags on Mrs. Okafor's counter because he'd noticed she was almost out, and locked up behind him. The supply yard off Route 9 opened at 7. Julian was there at 6:55, leaning against his truck with a folded sheet of paper in one hand and a cup of gas station coffee in the other. When the lot manager, a heavy-set man named Stu, came out to meet him, Julian slid the paper across the hood without ceremony. "Lumber order for the Denton Avenue job," Julian said. "I need it delivered by Thursday." Stu looked at the list and made a face. "Prices went up on the 2x6s, about 12%. "Stu." Julian took a sip of his coffee. "You gave me that same line in March and October." Stu scratched the back of his neck. "Supplier side, Julian. I'm not making it up." "I know you're not. I'm also not paying 12% over. I'll do 6, and I'll add the birchwood materials to this same order so you're not making 2 trips. A pause. Stu looked at the list again. "Deal," he said. Julian folded the paper back into his pocket. They shook hands. No raised voices, no drama. That was how he preferred it. He got home a little after 8. Bianca was in the kitchen, already dressed for work. Sharp blazer, heels she'd click across the tile floor every morning like punctuation. She was pouring coffee and looking at her phone when he came through the door. She glanced up, took one look at him, and the look on her face said everything before her mouth did. "You went out already," she said. It wasn't really a question. "Pipe on Caldwell." He set his bag down and moved to the sink to wash his hands. In those clothes. She exhaled the words more than spoke them. They're work clothes. Marcus Chen just bought a second location for his firm, she said, like that was a response to what he'd said. Keisha showed me pictures last night. The office space is beautiful, Julian. Glass walls, downtown. He dried his hands and didn't answer. You've been doing this. She gestured at him, at his clothes, at the general shape of his life. The same thing, the same truck, the same rentals, for as long as I can remember. Truck runs fine. That is not the point. She set her coffee mug down harder than she needed to. I'm just saying, some men have something to show for their work. Then her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, and something in her expression shifted. Just slightly, just for a second. She picked it up and walked toward the hallway. I have to take this, she said, her voice already dropping as she turned the corner. He listened to the sound of her heels go quiet as she moved further from the kitchen. That evening, Julian sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open, going through the monthly bills the way he did every few weeks. Electric, water, insurance. He moved through them the same way he moved through everything, steadily, without rushing. He almost missed it. A hotel charge, $214, midweek, a Tuesday. The name of the hotel was one he didn't recognize, not local. He sat back in his chair and thought about it. Bianca had worked late that Tuesday. He remembered because Aaliyah had asked where her mother was at dinner. He didn't close the laptop. He didn't call Bianca's name. He just sat there in the quiet of the kitchen, the screen's light blue against his face, and started scrolling back through the last 3 months of statements. He found it by accident. Bianca had left her phone on the counter near the coffee maker, plugged in and face up. She did that sometimes, set it down and forgot it when she went to bed. Julian had walked past it twice before he stopped. He stood there for a moment. The house was quiet. The clock above the stove read 11:22 p.m. He picked it up. The thread with Preston Vance went back 4 months. Julian sat on the couch in the dark living room and read it from the beginning. He read slowly, carefully, the way he read contracts. The early messages were careful, friendly, a little too warm. You always know how to make me laugh. Then warmer, then something else entirely. By the 2nd month, there was no question about what it was, but it wasn't just that. It was the planning. I looked at that apartment on Mercer, Bianca had written. 2 bedrooms. The second one could be a home office for you. Preston had replied, send me the link. We'll go Saturday. Further down, I just need a few more weeks to get everything sorted. Then Preston, take your time, babe. Just make sure you handle the money stuff before you file. Julian's jaw tightened. He kept reading. I'm not worried, Bianca had written. He doesn't even pay attention to the accounts. Once I'm free of all this, we start fresh. Once I'm free of all this. He read that line twice. Then he set the phone face down on his knee and looked at the wall for a moment. Then he kept going. He opened the banking app on his own phone, typed in his credentials, and pulled up their joint savings account. He hadn't checked it in a few weeks. He moved money deliberately and didn't monitor it daily. The balance was $11,400 lower than it should have been. He clicked through the transaction history. 4 transfers, spread out over 6 weeks. Each one small enough not to trigger an automatic alert. $2,100, $3,500, $1,800, $4,000. He recognized the structure immediately. It wasn't careless. Someone had told her how to do it that way, or she'd figured it out herself. Either way, it was patient, deliberate. He set his phone down on the cushion beside him and didn't move for a full minute. He went to the kitchen and found the charging cable still plugged in. He photographed Bianca's screen, the thread, The apartment messages, the line about handling the money stuff, holding his phone steady, making sure each image was sharp and clear. Then he opened his banking app again and screenshotted each transfer, one by one. He checked the timestamps, checked the angles, checked that the phone screen was legible in every frame. Then he set it back on the counter, face up, exactly the way he'd found it. He stood there a second, hands at his sides, listening to the house breathe. No sound from the bedroom. He walked down the hall to his home office and closed the door behind him. Naomi answered on the third ring. Her voice was alert in a way that told him she'd been half awake already. "It's late," she said. Not a complaint, just a fact. "I know." A pause, then, "How bad?" "Bad enough that I need you and Denise tomorrow morning, before I say a word to her." Naomi didn't ask who her was. She'd never needed much explanation. "What time?" she said. "Early, whenever Denise can do it." "I'll call her tonight. She'll make the time." Another pause. "Julian, are you okay?" He thought about the question honestly. His hands were steady. His voice was steady. The anger was there. It was real. It was hot. But it was sitting underneath something else. Something colder and quieter and more useful. "I'm fine," he said. "I just need the plan in place before anything else moves." "Okay." He could hear her shifting, probably reaching for a notepad. That was Naomi. Always the notepad. "Don't touch anything else tonight. Don't talk to her. Don't give her a single reason to change her timeline." "I know. I mean it." "Naomi." His voice was even. "I know." She exhaled slowly. "Okay, I'll have Denise's office call you by 7. "Thank you." "Get some sleep if you can." He didn't answer that part. They said good night, and he ended the call. He set his phone face down on the desk. The room was dark except for the thin line of streetlight coming through the blinds, laying a pale stripe across the floor. He didn't turn on the lamp. He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands in his lap and sat with it, all of it. The messages, the transfers, the apartment on Mercer Street, the line about being free of all this. He thought about his father, about the things the man used to say about patience, about how the quietest move was usually the right one. He didn't make another sound. He just sat in the dark and let the plan begin to take shape. The cookout at Naomi's house was a monthly thing. It had started years ago, back when their father was still alive. The last Sunday of the month, whoever could make it showed up. Folding tables in the backyard, music low on the speaker, the smell of charcoal and whatever Naomi's husband Marcus had been marinating since the night before. It wasn't fancy. It was just theirs. Bianca had always tolerated it. Lately, she'd insisted on attending. Julian had noticed that shift months ago, but hadn't said anything about it. Now he understood why. She wanted witnesses. He arrived in his work shirt. He hadn't changed. There was a streak of dried paint across the left shoulder from a touch-up job he'd done on a rental unit that morning, and his boots were dusty at the toe. He carried a foil pan of cornbread from the bakery on 5th because Naomi had asked him to. Bianca pulled up 10 minutes after he did in her own car. She stepped out in a new dress, cream-colored, fitted, the kind of thing that cost real money. Her hair was done. Her earrings caught the afternoon light. She looked like she was arriving at something, not a family cookout in someone's backyard. Julian watched her from across the lawn. He didn't say anything. He set the cornbread on the table and accepted a cup of lemonade from Marcus and let the afternoon move. For the first 2 hours, everything looked normal from the outside. Bianca laughed loud and leaned into conversations. She'd brought 2 friends, Tamara and a woman named Giselle, who Julian had met maybe twice. The 3 of them stayed close together near the end of the table, talking with an energy that felt rehearsed, like they'd already run through this. Naomi stayed near the grill. She and Julian hadn't spoken privately yet, but twice he caught her watching Bianca with the kind of still, patient expression that meant she already knew exactly what was coming. Denise was there too. She and Naomi had been close since law school, and her presence at family gatherings wasn't unusual. She sat in a lawn chair with a plate balanced on her knee, calm and unremarkable, the way she always was. She didn't look at Julian much. She didn't need to. It happened just past 3 o'clock. The plates had been cleared. Someone's kid was chasing a dog around the yard. The music had shifted to something slower. Julian was standing near the fence talking to his Uncle Raymond about a drainage issue on Raymond's property, when Bianca stepped into the middle of the yard, Tamara and Giselle flanking her like she'd positioned them there. Her voice carried. "I've been wanting to say something for a while," she said, "and I think it's better to just be honest with the people who matter." The yard got quieter, not all at once, but gradually, the way sound bleeds out when something pulls focus. "Julian and I are done." She said it clearly, with her chin up and her shoulders back. "I've filed, and I've met someone, a real man, who actually has something going for him, who wants to give me the kind of life I've always deserved." She paused for effect. Let the word land the way she'd planned it. "I'm upgrading." Tamara gave a small nod. Giselle touched her arm. The yard was silent for a moment. Julian stood near the fence with his lemonade cup in one hand, paint still dried on his shoulder, and said nothing. He didn't move, didn't change his expression. Just looked at her the way you look at a weather forecast, absorbing information, nothing more. Uncle Raymond glanced at him sideways. Julian took a slow sip of his lemonade. Across the yard, Naomi looked at Denise. Denise looked back. Neither of them spoke. Bianca held the moment a beat longer, then turned back to her friends, and the conversation around them slowly resumed, awkward and low, the way it does after something lands wrong in a room. By 6, the guests were gone. Marcus took the kids inside. The yard went quiet. Julian folded up the last 2 chairs and stacked them against the fence, while Naomi wiped down the table and Denise gathered her things without being asked. The 3 of them ended up in Naomi's kitchen without discussing it. Naomi poured herself a glass of water. Denise set her bag on the counter and leaned against it. Julian stood with his hands in his pockets near the window, looking out at the empty yard. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Denise said quietly, "She told her attorney you're a struggling contractor, that there's not much to go after." She paused. "She genuinely believes that." Julian nodded slowly. He'd expected as much. Naomi looked at him. "So what do you want to do?" He was quiet for a moment, not uncertain, just making sure the words were right before he said them. "Let her go exactly the way she wants to go," he said. "We just make sure she goes with what she actually earned." He paused. "Not what she assumes she's owed." Naomi held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once. Outside, the sun was dropping behind the tree line, long and gold across Naomi's backyard, and the yard where Bianca had said her piece was empty and still. The process server arrived on a Tuesday. Julian was in the back office at Reeves Construction and Rentals, going over a supply estimate with his site foreman, when his receptionist knocked twice and opened the door. She held a manila envelope and had the careful look people get when they're handing someone something they didn't ask for. "Man out front says it needs your signature," she said. Julian signed for it, set it on the desk without opening it, and finished the conversation with his foreman first. Rescheduled the supply delivery, confirmed the crew start time for Thursday, walked the man out. Then he came back, sat down, and opened the envelope. He read it through once, then again. Bianca's attorney was a man named Gerald Fossey. Julian didn't know him, but Denise did. She said his name with the particular flatness she reserved for things she found mildly irritating. She read through the filing herself that afternoon, seated across from Julian at the small table in her office on Clement Street, her reading glasses on, turning pages with the practiced calm of someone who had seen a lot of paperwork and knew where the lies usually hid. She stopped on page 4. "She's describing you as a small contractor operating a modestly profitable local business," Denise said. She read from the page directly. "Petitioner believes the marital estate to be limited in scope, consisting primarily of jointly held savings, one residential property, and the respondent's sole proprietor construction business, the value of which has not been independently assessed." She set the page down. "She's asking for spousal support, substantial monthly support, plus 40% of what she's calling the marital assets." Denise folded her hands on the table. Either she has no idea what the trust holds, or she's telling her attorney a version of events designed to make her look like the struggling party. "Does it matter which?" Julian asked. Denise thought about it for a beat. For the filing, no. For her strategy, yes. If she genuinely doesn't know, she'll be blindsided. If she's hiding what she knows to appear sympathetic, she tapped the edge of the filing with 2 fingers. That creates its own set of problems for her later. Julian leaned back in his chair. "And the trust?" Denise picked up a different folder. Thicker, older, the cover worn soft at the corners. She opened it and laid it flat on the table between them. The top page was dated almost 30 years back. His father's signature was at the bottom, neat and deliberate, the letters of a man who understood exactly what he was doing. "The Reeves Family Holding Trust was established by your father before you were married," she said, "before you were even engaged. Every commercial property, every parcel of undeveloped land, every apartment complex transferred into that structure was placed there under irrevocable terms." She looked at Julian. "It is not a marital asset. It was never a marital asset. It cannot be divided in a divorce proceeding because legally you don't own it. The trust does." Can her attorney challenge that? "They can try," Denise said. "They'll lose. But trying will cost her time and money she probably doesn't have budgeted if she thinks she's divorcing a small contractor." She let that sit for a moment. "I want to start pulling the documentation together now. The original deed transfers, the trust amendments, the annual filings. I want everything organized and ready before this gets to a hearing." Julian nodded. "One thing," he said. Denise looked up. "Don't correct her misunderstanding yet." His voice was even, unhurried. "Whatever she thinks I'm worth, let her keep thinking it. If her attorney files motions based on that picture of things, let them." Denise studied him for a moment. She wasn't surprised. She knew how Julian worked, but she wanted to be sure they were clear. "You understand that means letting this run a little before we show our hand," she said. "I know. Her attorney may get aggressive. There may be pressure." "There'll be pressure regardless," Julian said. "I'd rather it come before they know what they're dealing with than after." Denise was quiet for a moment. She closed the old folder carefully, like it deserved the care, and set it on top of the filing. 2 documents side by side. What Bianca believed was true and what actually was. "All right," she said. She stood and carried both files to the large gray safe built into the wall behind her desk. It was the kind of safe that didn't announce itself. No visible handle, flush with the surface, the door disguised behind a framed map of the county that she moved aside without ceremony. She placed the folders inside, organized them against the back wall, and pressed the door shut. The lock engaged with a quiet, solid click. She turned back toward Julian. "I'll have the groundwork ready before her attorney knows what they're actually dealing with." Julian nodded once and picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. Naomi's office was on the second floor of a building she and Julian co-owned, though the sign on the door just said Hart Consulting. She liked it that way. She had always shared her brother's preference for keeping the real picture behind a plain frame. Julian arrived a little past noon on Friday. Naomi was already at her desk, a mug of coffee going cold beside her keyboard, and a manila folder open in front of her. She didn't look up when he came in. She just said, "Close the door." He did. She waited until he was seated before she turned the folder around and slid it across the desk toward him. "Preston Vance," she said. Julian looked down at the first page. It was a printed summary, names, dates, notes from what looked like several different conversations, all typed up in Naomi's clean, no-frills style. She had never been one for unnecessary words, in conversation or on paper. "I spent the better part of this week making calls," she said. "He's known in certain circles, not well known. Known the way a bad check gets known." She tapped the folder. "Start at the top." Julian read. Preston Vance had been selling luxury cars at 2 different dealerships over the past 6 years, moving between them every couple of years with no real explanation. His income was commission-based and inconsistent. The Mercedes he drove, the one Bianca had mentioned more than once, the one she described with a tone Julian recognized as comparison, was leased. The condo he lived in, the one with the rooftop terrace he posted pictures of, was also leased. Both were behind on their payments. Julian turned the page. The next section was the one that made him go still. Before Bianca, there had been 2 other women. The first was a woman named Carla, a nurse in the next county over, who Preston had dated for nearly a year. By month 4, he was on her cell phone plan and had borrowed a little over $9,000 that he called a short-term loan while a deal cleared. The deal never cleared. He was gone by month 11, citing what he told mutual friends was an incompatibility. Carla was left with the debt and a joint credit card with a balance she hadn't agreed to run up. The second was a woman named Diane, a small business owner. Preston had moved faster with her. By month 3, he had co-signed on a furniture account in her name and used it. He stayed 8 months total. When he left, the balance on that account was just under $6,000. Diane had spent 2 years contesting it. Naomi let Julian read without interrupting him. When he finished, he set the folder down and looked up. "He targeted both of them," Julian said. "Yes." "He thought they had money." "Both of them had the appearance of it. A good job, a small business. They looked like access." Naomi picked up her coffee, remembered it was cold, set it back down. Neither of them had the kind of money that would actually satisfy him, which is exactly why he left when he figured that out. Julian sat with that for a moment. The room was quiet. From downstairs, faint and distant, came the sound of someone moving through the building. He was thinking about Bianca, not with softness. That particular feeling had burned itself out somewhere between the hotel charge on the bank statement and the cookout at Naomi's house. He was thinking about her the way you think about a situation you can see clearly from the outside, but that someone else inside it cannot see at all. Bianca had looked at Julian and seen a man who wasn't enough. She had looked at Preston and seen a man who was more. She had read both of them wrong, and she had made that error out loud and in public and in front of people who would remember it. "She doesn't know," Julian said. "No," Naomi said. "She thinks she left a man going nowhere for a man going somewhere." He looked at her the same way she looked at me. Julian's voice didn't carry any particular heat. It was just a fact, named plainly. He assumed she had access to real money because of me, and she doesn't actually know what I have, so she couldn't have told him otherwise even if she wanted to. Naomi nodded slowly. You could warn her, she said. She didn't say it like she was recommending it. She said it like she was naming the option so they could both look at it. Julian thought about it. He genuinely did. He thought about Bianca's face at the cookout, the way she had said the word upgrading like it was a verdict on 11 years. He thought about the look she had given him, not cruel exactly, but final in a way that meant she had already stopped seeing him. She had made her choice. She had made it loudly and publicly and on her own terms. Some things you had to walk all the way through before you understood what they cost. No, he said. She'll see it when she sees it. He picked up the folder, squared the pages, and handed it back to Naomi. Keep all of it, he said. Everything you've got, documented and stored. Naomi took the folder and nodded. Already am. Julian stood, picked up his jacket from the arm of the chair and headed for the door. 2 weeks passed. Julian heard about the move from Aaliyah, not from Bianca. His daughter mentioned it the way teenagers mention things they don't fully want to talk about, sideways, while looking at her phone, standing in the kitchen doorway on a Sunday evening. She's living at his place now, Aaliyah said. She said to tell you. Julian nodded. Okay. That was all either of them said about it. On a Thursday evening, Julian was at the kitchen table with a bowl of reheated rice and a stack of supply invoices when headlights swept across the front window. He recognized Bianca's car by the sound of the engine before he saw it. She had always driven with more speed than the neighborhood required. Denise was already there. She had come over at 5:30, as Julian had asked, to review a set of trust documents. She was seated across from him with her briefcase open, a legal pad beside her coffee cup. She looked up when the headlights passed the window, then looked at Julian. He stood, walked to the front door, and opened it before Bianca could knock. Bianca was dressed well, better than casually. She had put thought into how she looked, which told him she had put thought into this visit. She had a small leather bag on her shoulder, and her hair was done. She looked like someone who had prepared for a performance. "Julian," she said. Her voice was measured, friendly almost. "Bianca." He stepped back from the door. "Come in." She entered and stopped when she saw Denise at the table. "I didn't know you had company." "Denise was here for work," Julian said simply. He didn't offer to move the meeting. He didn't apologize for it. He gestured toward the living room. "We can sit in here." Bianca's eyes moved between the two of them for a moment. Then she followed him in. They sat across from each other. Denise stayed at the kitchen table with her legal pad, visible through the open doorway. Present, but quiet. Bianca set her bag on her knee and folded her hands over it. "I wanted to talk before this becomes a whole thing," she said. "I think we can keep this clean. A quiet settlement. Fast. Simple. Everybody moves on." "I'm listening," Julian said. "My attorney is ready to negotiate, but I want to do this without a lot of back and forth, without it becoming ugly." She let that word sit a moment. Ugly. You know how people talk in this community. It doesn't have to go that direction. Julian watched her. His hands were relaxed in his lap. His face was even. "You've got friends here," she continued, her voice staying smooth. "People who respect you. I'd hate for the wrong things to come out in the middle of a long, messy court process. Things that color how people see you." She tilted her head slightly. "You know what I mean." "I hear you," Julian said. "So if you're willing to sit down with both our attorneys and work something out that's fair, we can keep this out of people's mouths." She gave him a small, controlled smile. I think that's better for both of us. Julian nodded slowly, as if considering it. I appreciate you coming by, he said. Bianca waited for more. There wasn't more. So, you'll talk to your attorney? She asked. Denise handles all of that for me, he said. You can have your attorney reach out to her directly. Bianca's smile thinned. She had come here expecting resistance she could push against, or fear she could use. She had found neither. She looked at him the way people look at a locked door when they expected it to open, frustrated and slightly thrown. She stood, smoothed the front of her jacket. I hope you think about what I said, Julian. I always think carefully, he said. He walked her to the front door and held it open. She went out without looking back. He watched her tail lights until they turned the corner. Then he closed the door. Denise was already writing when he returned to the kitchen. Her pen moved steadily down the legal pad, her handwriting tight and precise. Julian poured himself a glass of water and sat down. She threatened you, Denise said, not looking up. Carefully worded, but that's what it was. Social damage, as leverage. She wants a favorable settlement, and she brought a threat to get it. She turned a page. I'm noting the time, the specific language she used, and the implied condition. This goes into the file. Julian drank his water. Will it matter? He asked. It already matters. Denise set her pen down and looked at him directly. Her attorney is going to walk into settlement talks, claiming you have everything to lose from a public fight. This conversation tells me exactly what their strategy is. She tapped the legal pad. And now we have documentation that she came here and tried to use social pressure against you before a single negotiation took place. That paints a picture of her intent that her attorney will not enjoy explaining. She closed the pad and slid it into her briefcase. You gave her nothing tonight. She handed us more leverage than we had this morning. Julian nodded. He set the glass down on the table. Denise clicked her briefcase shut and rested her hands on top of it. The county business gala, she said. It's in 3 weeks. The gala committee called on a Tuesday morning. Julian was on a ladder at the time, checking a gutter drain at the Millbrook Avenue complex, when his phone buzzed in his chest pocket. He climbed down before answering. The woman on the other end introduced herself as the events coordinator for the County Business Development Council. She spoke carefully, like someone who had rehearsed what she was going to say. Mr. Reeves, the committee reviewed the year's honorees last week. We'd like to name you as this year's keynote honoree for contributions to local housing development and economic growth. A brief pause. We know you've remained anonymous in some of your involvements. That was actually part of the discussion. The committee felt it was time. Julian looked at the ladder leaning against the brick wall, at the gravel lot below his boots. I appreciate that, he said. Will you accept? Yes, he said. I'll be there. He pocketed the phone and climbed back up the ladder to finish checking the drain. He told Naomi that evening, sitting in her home office with the door closed and a pair of coffee cups between them. She listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When he finished, she was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then she said, Dad would have laughed. Julian smiled. Yeah. He would have put his coffee down and laughed until his shoulders shook. She looked at the window. Then he would have told you to write every word yourself and not let anybody pretty it up. That's the plan. Naomi pulled a yellow legal pad from the corner of her desk and slid it across to him. Then start. Denise finalized the trust documentation the following week. She spread everything across the conference table in her office, 12 years of holding company records, deed histories, the original trust instrument their father had signed before either of them had gray in their hair, chain of title documents for 41 separate parcels. Everything that showed, cleanly and without argument, that the Reeves family trust had existed long before Julian's marriage, and that no portion of it had ever been marital property. Julian reviewed the stack with her page by page. Her attorney sent a discovery request yesterday, Denise said, sliding a letter across the table. They're asking for business records, tax filings, ownership documents. Good, Julian said. Denise raised an eyebrow. They'll get exactly what the law requires, he said. All of it, the full picture. He set the letter down. Let them read every page. Denise allowed herself a small smile. That's a more aggressive posture than I expected from you. I'm not hiding anything, Julian said. I never was. He was reviewing his draft remarks at the kitchen table on a Saturday afternoon when Aaliyah appeared in the doorway. She was holding a manila folder. Her expression was the kind teenagers wear when they've already decided what they're going to say, but haven't started saying it yet. Julian recognized the folder before she spoke. It was from Denise's office. He had left a copy of the trust summary on the passenger seat of his truck 2 weeks ago, and she must have found it. You own half the county, she said. Not a question. Julian set his pen down. Not half. Aaliyah sat across from him and placed the folder between them. She looked at it, then at him. Why didn't you tell me? Because you're 16, he said, and because it wasn't the right time. You let her stand there and say all of that. Her voice wasn't quite angry. It was something harder to name, the voice of someone trying to square what they saw with what they now knew. At Aunt Naomi's, you just stood there. Yes. And you didn't say anything. No. Aaliyah looked at the table. Her jaw was tight. Then something in her face shifted, some tension easing into something quieter. Why? Julian laced his fingers together on the table. Because if I'd said something then, it would have looked like I was defending myself, like I needed to prove something. He held her gaze. I don't need to prove anything. The truth doesn't need my help. It just needs time. Aaliyah was quiet for a long moment. She's going to find out, she said. At the gala. Yes. In front of everyone. Yes. She picked up the folder and looked at the first page again. Then she set it back down with a kind of careful finality, like she was closing something that had been open too long. I want to go with you, she said. To the gala. Julian looked at his daughter, the set of her shoulders, the decision already made and sitting quietly behind her eyes. Okay, he said. It was Naomi who told him about Preston. A contact at the business council had mentioned it. Preston Vance had worked his way onto the guest list through a commercial lease client he barely knew, pitching himself as a networking contact worth having. He had told people he was attending with his partner. He would be near the stage. Julian received the information without any change in his expression. He confirmed his attendance that same afternoon. On the night of the gala, Julian wore a dark suit he had owned for 6 years and a pair of dress shoes he had polished himself that morning. Naomi wore deep burgundy. Aaliyah wore her hair up and a dress she had picked without asking either parent for an opinion. They walked into the ballroom together, the three of them, and across the room, near the low platform stage with its lit podium and the county seal on the backdrop, Bianca stood beside Preston Vance, champagne glass in hand, laughing at something he had just said. The MC was a compact man in a well-fitted tuxedo who had been working the county circuit for years. He knew how to hold a room. He let the applause from the previous award die completely before he stepped back to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, our final honoree tonight is someone a number of you may recognize, and a number of you may be surprised to learn you already know. A polite murmur moved through the crowd. Julian was standing just off the side of the stage. Naomi was 2 steps behind him. Aaliyah was at a table near the center of the room, her back straight, watching. Over the past 2 decades, one name has appeared quietly, and I do mean quietly, on the ownership records of more than 40 parcels of commercial and residential property across this county. The Millbrook Avenue apartment complex, the Granger Street mixed-use development, the Southfield Commons Affordable Housing Initiative, which broke ground last spring and will house over 200 families by next year. The MC paused, letting the list settle. And this building, the venue you are standing in tonight, all majority-owned or developed in part through the Reeves Family Trust. The murmur turned into something louder. Heads moved. People looked at each other. Please welcome this year's keynote honoree, Julian Reeves. Julian walked to the podium at an even pace. No rush. He adjusted the microphone once and looked out at the room. The applause was strong and genuine. He waited for it to settle. Near the front, Bianca stood with a champagne flute in her hand that she had stopped lifting. Her mouth was slightly open. The color had drained from her face the way color drains from something that can't hold on to it anymore. Slowly, and then all at once. Preston stood beside her, smiling at the stage with the practiced ease of a man who had not yet put it together. Julian looked at the room, not at her. "My father used to say," he began, his voice level and unhurried, "that the loudest thing a man can do is nothing." He let that sit for a moment. He built the first piece of this portfolio in 1987. He was 31 years old. He had lost everything once before because he told the wrong people what he had. So the second time, he didn't tell anyone. Julian rested his hands on the sides of the podium. He taught me that work is its own announcement, that equity speaks, that the man who needs to tell you what he's worth probably isn't. Quiet laughter moved across the room, the knowing kind. "I've driven the same truck for 11 years, Julian said. "I fix my own drains. I show up on job sites in work boots because that's where the work is." He looked across the faces in front of him. "I'm not standing up here tonight because I think I've arrived somewhere. I'm standing here because this county deserves to know that the investment in its people, in workforce housing, in walkable neighborhoods, in land that stays in the community, that investment has been going on for a long time, and it's going to keep going." He stepped back slightly from the mic. "My father's name is on the cornerstone of 3 buildings in this county. That means more to me than any of this." A brief pause. "I thank you." The applause that followed was full and immediate. Several people stood. Julian stepped back from the podium, nodded once to the MC, and walked off the stage the same way he had walked on. He didn't look toward the front of the room. He didn't need to. The crowd was still buzzing when he reached the floor. People stopped him. A handshake here, a brief word there, a county commissioner who gripped his elbow and said something about the Southfield project. Julian accepted each one with patience and said what needed to be said. He could feel the room differently now, not because anything about him had changed, but because the room's understanding of him had. He found Naomi near the edge of the crowd. She handed him a glass of water without comment. He drank it. Aaliyah appeared at his side a moment later and stood close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. She didn't say anything either. She just looked out at the room with him, and that was enough. It was near the exit corridor, about 20 minutes later, when he saw Bianca. She was not mingling anymore. She was not laughing. She stood slightly apart from the flow of people moving toward the doors, like someone who had tried to leave and found that her feet had stopped cooperating. Preston was not beside her. Her dress was expensive. Her posture was not. Her eyes found Julian's across the corridor, and something moved through her face that he recognized. Not grief, not regret exactly. More like the specific discomfort of a person standing in the rubble of a calculation that had always been wrong, only now knowing it. She moved toward him slowly. When she reached him, her voice was low and careful, stripped of the performance she usually kept around it like armor. "Julian." She looked down briefly, then back up. "Can we talk? Privately, before the night's over." Julian looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded toward the side hallway, a narrower corridor off the main ballroom with sconce lighting and no crowd. He didn't touch her arm, didn't gesture, just walked toward it and let her follow. The noise from the ballroom dropped to a low hum behind them. Their footsteps were the loudest thing in the hall. Julian stopped near a narrow window that looked out over the parking lot and turned to face her. Bianca's hands were clasped in front of her. She looked like she was holding herself together by deciding to. "I know how this looks," she started. "You don't have to explain that part," Julian said. His voice was calm, not warm, not cold, just level. "That part I already understand." She went quiet. He looked at her without anger, without theater. "You believed I was small, Bianca, not just broke. Small. Like I didn't know what I was doing. Like I was someone you had outgrown." He paused. "I let you believe that." Her jaw shifted slightly. "Julian, I'm not saying it to hurt you. I'm saying it so you understand it was a choice I made. Same as you made yours." He kept his hands still at his sides. "You spent the last year building an exit based on what you thought I was worth. You opened a separate account. You moved money out of savings. You told your attorney I was a struggling contractor." He said it plainly, the way someone reads a list they've memorized. Every one of those things is documented. The color that had come back into her face since the speech drained out again. "The trust," he continued, "was built by my father before either of us was married. It's irrevocable. It was never marital property, not 1 acre of it, not one building. Denise has had the paperwork ready for 3 weeks." He watched her process that. "What you're going to get out of this divorce is what the law says you're owed, based on what we actually shared. Not what you assumed was there, not what you told your attorney to reach for." Bianca's mouth opened, then closed. "And that conversation you had at the house," he said, "the one where you suggested I cooperate quietly or face social damage." He let that word hang there, damage, like something fragile and already broken. Denise was present and documented it the same evening. It's on record. She looked away toward the wall. He let the silence sit. He didn't fill it. When she looked back, her voice was thin. "I didn't know about any of it. The trust, the buildings." She stopped. "I really didn't know." "I know you didn't," Julian said. And he meant it. There was no satisfaction in his voice, just honesty. "That's the part you'll have to sit with. Not that I hid it from you, but that you never looked close enough to see it." He stepped back from the window. "I hope you're careful, Bianca. I mean that." He didn't say Preston's name. He didn't have to. He walked back toward the ballroom, leaving her standing in the corridor with the hum of other people's conversations filling the air around her. Preston was gone within 11 days. Not a dramatic exit. No argument, no scene. He simply became unavailable. A text that came 4 hours late. Then, not at all. A night he said he was working that turned into 2 nights. Then a week. By the time Bianca understood what was happening, his name had already stopped appearing on the lease renewal for the condo. A mutual contact mentioned, without much ceremony, that Preston had been spotted across town with a woman who worked in commercial lending. The Mercedes got repossessed on a Tuesday. Bianca found out from a neighbor. Aaliyah came to her mother's apartment on a Saturday morning, 2 weeks after the gala. She sat at the kitchen table with her hands flat on the surface, a habit she'd picked up from Julian without knowing it, and she spoke plainly. "You knew what you were doing when you moved that money," she said. She wasn't yelling. She was 16, but her voice had gone somewhere older. "I found the trust paperwork at Denise's office before the gala. I read it. I understood it." She looked at her mother directly. "So I know what it means that you told your attorney Dad had nothing." Bianca tried to start 3 separate sentences. "I'm not asking you to explain," Aaliyah said. "I just needed you to know I understand what happened. All of it." She picked up her bag from the back of the chair. "I want to live with Dad." That weekend, Julian carried boxes. It wasn't a long process. Aaliyah didn't have much to move: a duffel bag, 2 plastic bins, a backpack with her school things, the framed photo of her grandfather that had always sat on her desk. Julian loaded them into the bed of the old truck without ceremony. No commentary, no celebration. Aaliyah stood on the front steps of his house and watched him lift the last box, her arms crossed loosely against the October air. "You need help?" she asked. "I'm good," he said. He set the box down on the porch, pulled out his keys, and looked over at her. "You good?" She thought about it honestly. Then she nodded. "Yeah," she said. "I'm good." He unlocked the front door and held it open for her, and she walked inside. The truck needed new wiper blades. Julian had been meaning to replace them for 2 weeks, but every morning something else came first. A call from a site foreman, a supply delivery that came in short, a tenant at the Birchwood complex who needed a broken hallway light fixed before her night shift. So the wiper blades stayed on the list, and the truck stayed the same, and Julian kept driving it. It was a Tuesday in late October when he turned off Route 9 onto Clement Street and saw the development for the first time with the scaffolding fully gone. 14 units, 2-bedroom each, deep porches, real brick facing, a small green space in the center with benches that would hold up through a winter. The county had provided partial funding, but the land had been in the trust for 11 years, sitting quiet, waiting for the right plan. Julian had drawn the first version of that plan on a legal pad at his kitchen table the February after the gala, while Aaliyah did homework across from him and said, without looking up, "You should put Granddad's name on it." He had. There it was, cut into the stone above the main entrance, lowercase and clean. Reeves Family Homes, built in memory of Charles R. Reeves. Julian pulled the truck to the curb and let it idle. A lot had settled in a year. Not all of it quietly, but most of it. Denise had closed out the divorce settlement in February. Bianca received what the law provided from the actual shared marital assets, which was modest and correct. The trust had never been touched. Bianca's attorney had pushed once more, received the full irrevocable trust documentation in response, and gone quiet after that. There was nothing left to argue. The paperwork was 50 years old and bulletproof. Word had gotten around. That was the thing about a county this size. Word always got around. The same people who had heard Bianca announce her upgrade at Naomi's cookout were the same people who had been in the ballroom the night Julian took the stage. Nobody needed to say much. The math did the talking. Bianca was living with her mother now, out in Grover Heights, in the same house she'd grown up in. She'd taken an administrative job at a medical billing company. Steady hours, no equity, no upward path she'd told anyone about. A woman named Rochelle, who ran the zoning office and knew everyone, had mentioned seeing Bianca at the grocery store twice in the past month. She'd been friendly enough, Rochelle said, still telling a version of things that put her in a better light than the facts supported. Still landing on, he wasn't who I thought he was, which was true in only one direction, and not the one Bianca meant. Julian didn't track her life. He wasn't trying to. He'd heard what he heard, the way you hear weather passing through. He noted it, and he kept moving. Aaliyah was 17 now, taller, sharper, and fully settled in a way that had taken a few months to arrive, but felt permanent once it did. She'd joined the debate team at her school. She came home talking fast about arguments she'd made and points she'd conceded when the evidence demanded it, which made Julian smile in the way that crept up on him quietly. He helped her run practice arguments at the kitchen table some evenings. She pushed back hard, and he let her. She was right more often than she knew. There was also a woman named Clara. She ran the Community Land Trust office 2 buildings down from Reeves Construction, a small operation that helped low-income families navigate property ownership. Julian had known her for 6 years, before the gala, before the divorce, before any of it. She'd knocked on his office door once about a zoning question and stayed for 40 minutes talking about how the county was failing its renters. He'd thought about that conversation for a week afterward. They'd had dinner 3 times now. Nothing declared, nothing rushed. She'd known what he owned before most of the county did, and she'd treated him exactly the same as when she thought he was only a contractor. That was the thing he kept coming back to. Not that she was impressed, that she wasn't surprised. Julian cut the engine. The street was quiet. A few kids on bikes moved through the far end of the block. The brick of the new building was still pale, not yet weathered, the mortar lines crisp and white. By spring, the first families would be in. By next fall, the green space in the center would have grass worn down by foot traffic, and that would be a good thing, not a bad one. He stepped out of the truck. The October air was cold and sharp. He put his hands in the pockets of his jacket, the same canvas Carhartt he'd worn for 3 years, and walked to the entrance and looked up. His father's name in stone, Charles R. Reeves, a man who had lost everything once to people who smelled money on him and rebuilt quietly and taught his son to do the same. Julian stood there for a long moment, not thinking about Bianca, not thinking about Preston, not thinking about the gala or the trust or the settlement or any of it. Just looking up at the name, still himself, still here. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.